Hi, good day, everyone. My name is Daniel Adeni, and I'm a professional officer at Hickley Africa. And I'd like to welcome everybody to this session, which basically is going to be looking at how can we build circular economy innovation in our cities in Africa. Before we go forward, may I please also speak about the webinar protocols for this session. The webinar is going to be recorded, and by participating, you're also consenting to be recorded. Also, we want to welcome active participation in our chat boxes. So we invite you, we want to have like active engagement, and we want to be participatory as much as possible. So we invite you to, in a way, make use of the chat box and drop your questions there and your comment, as it were. And we believe we are going to have an engaging session today. Essentially, for this series, the series is put together by Hickley Africa, which I work for, and Africa Circular Economy Network, HACEN, and also Stellenbosch Launch Lab. It's a series that is put together in line with our project, which is called ACE Africa Project, which is Accelerating Circular Economy in Africa. And basically, the project is about ensuring and looking at the growth of circular economy businesses in Africa, and how can we actually activate these businesses to promote circular transitions in Africa. And today we have an interesting session and some interesting people to help us, to guide us through the session. And today we are going to be looking at existing and potential policy and legislative frameworks to activate circular economy in Africa. What are those frameworks that we can actually highlight, whether they are existing or whether they are potential, what we need to look at to activate these. And without further ado, I would like to invite forward our moderator for this session, Oluwakemi Ajakai, to take us through the session. And I'm very sure it's going to be an interesting session. Welcome, Kemi, to the session.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I appreciate your introduction. So off we go. A warm welcome and good day. Let me use the word good day to all participants and attendees across the globe. Thank you very much for joining to this discussion. Well, so I've been introduced. Kemi Ajakai, and I'm the Nigerian chapter lead of the African Circular Economy Network. So I believe that in the chat box shortly, you will have the website, the link to our website, and then you can do further reading on Africa Circular Economy Network, and of course, the organizers of today's webinar. Really many things, because I consider it an honor to moderate this webinar. And of course, importantly, is that we have the finest of global participants across diverse fields, taking time out and making sacrifice to follow this webinar series. Okay, so before I go on, it's International Women's Day. And of course, there's a saying that where there is a woman, there is magic. So I say happy International Women's Day to all the ladies on this webinar at the moment. Right, so I recall years ago when I was having a module on environmental auditing. And so the guest lecturer, he just exclaimed and he was like, okay, in a nutshell, environmental audit is whatever you want it to be. And because it was a mixed class, and so during the tea break, my very good friend from the Orient origin, he's fond of calling me Anne. So he said, Anne, I mean, how does this guy expect us to answer or define environmental audit in an exam situation? And so we spent 15 minutes of that tea break discussing framing and audit, and then eventually we aligned on why he concluded that an environmental audit is whatever you would call it. But today we'll have to ask ourselves, how? Africa, how? How do we design Africa for circularity? And you cannot take away that we have to design circular policies. Not just designing circular policies, we have, how can we strengthen policies to play a role and enable growth of circular economy businesses? How do we develop national, regional maps to align and harmonize, our policies in the global arena? And so, I mean, it's very, very apt that the organizers of this webinar, ICLE in conjunction with African Circular Economy, have thought it needful to have the second series of the webinar themed Designing Systems and Policy Frameworks for Circular Economy Innovation. I took a close look 2 days ago at the website of Local Governments for Sustainability, and I saw that it's a global network of about 2,500 local and regional governments. And out of these 2,500, you have just 118 members from 28 African countries. Of course, when I like to speak and do my research, I always sometimes like to narrow down to ECOWAS, because I'm a Nigerian, and of course, Nigeria is a member of ECOWAS. And so 10 of those 28 countries belong to ECOWAS. And it got me thinking, how do we harness, our community? And of course, Nigeria has just representation from 1 state government and 5 local governments. So I'll mention to Beza, Beza later on after this call, we have to see how other, African countries that are members of ACN can also become members of the Local Government for Sustainability. There's an African proverb that says that you cannot name a child that is not born. But the birth of circular economy can be traced to as early as the 1860s. And that's the truth. The concept itself is not entirely novel. It has stemmed from various schools of thought, the 3 R's, biomimicry, blue economy, and whatnot. And of course, CE acts as an umbrella for myriad concepts. But of course, in 2012, 2013, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, popularized the concept of circular economy. Well, we realized that a decade after, we are still foot dragging in Africa. We're yet to accept it, we're yet to adopt it, the implementation across various industries and sectors. How are we going to constantly develop successful new products and services and circular economy business model? Be it from agriculture, to technology, to construction, transportation, travel, and tourism. There's a need to shift from doing less harm to doing not just good, but striving for regional best circular economy model. And that time is now. Social media helps propagate, it has its pros and cons, but I think there's enough of these businesses glamorizing petty efforts at doing less harm, presenting illusionary statistics with constant obtainable realities, and that's the truth. We need to start designing for circularity. There is that urge, and that time, of course, is now. It is important to amplify how African businesses can design, can create, deliver value, be it by dematerializing, choosing safe materials, all sorts. Today we have our guest speakers. They will be, taking us through their own experience. They'll make presentations of what they've worked on and tell us how policies can, be implemented successfully towards that transition that we expect. Last night, I took time to look at Chatham House. Of course, we know they're an independent policy institute. And so when you look at the website circulareconomy.earth, Chatham House has done it nicely that you have CE policy in the areas of extended producer responsibility, fiscal policy, national circular economy policy, product policy, and waste management and recycling. And I narrowed down again to Africa. And I saw that there are 49 countries out of the 54 in Africa that actually have hold policies on waste management and recycling. So that tells us that is the area where we are most focused on. And if you are a trained circular economy person, you realize that recycling is the least favorable option. How do we get to look at the smaller loops? How do we enhance policy in other key particular areas? And so with this, I would take that as my opening and introductory remark. And hopefully by the end of today's presentation and by our guest speakers, we will be more comfortable and confident in being involved in participating in designing systems for circular economy. And so without further ado, I will turn the next 12 minutes to our first presenter, Katrin Batt. She's a co-founder at Circular Norway, and she would have a presentation, give us insight into Circular City Transition Strategy. Katrin, over to you, please.
Thank you so much for this heartfelt welcoming, and thank you for being part of this session in the series that is so important, how you leverage a variety of agendas during this spring. So my contribution is I will be sharing some experiences, and I will also hook myself on some of the topics you mentioned, how we think in systems, how we need to start immediately, and how we maybe generate a universal principle, how to actually start accelerating transition. I will start sharing my screen right now. Back if you are seeing this. Is it okay?
Yes, it is.
Daniel, can you approve that you?
Yeah, it's fine.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hence, I will be talking about transition. Oh, thank you. I have really loud, there's anything. So anyhow, I'll keep it to time. Circular City Transition Strategies. How is this enabling a faster acceleration of circular economy? I'm also looking forward to listening to Vina after here and participating in a dialogue. I will share some of my views on what is actually the drivers in my region, share a little bit about the Nordic region as where we are operating, and how can we learn and collaborate with each other. I will also share one system approach that we have tested, which is as a strategic circular city scan tool, which is enabling for moreover and new innovations, and how do we make sure we solve the real problem, which is a regional problem or a place problem. And finally, I will share some initial thoughts how we might even improve a holistic approach. So myself, I have, as you introduced me, I was 5 years ago, I was initiator of the circular economy organization, Circular Norway, to make an innovation organization. And based on these experiences, I have also continued working with corporate strategies and business strategies for circular economy, and work within also leveraging these experiences to Nordic Circular Hotspot, which is a Nordic NGO, where we try to work across borders, across value chains, and across sectors, just as you mentioned, and enable to see how our small Nordic markets separate can be a larger entity, while together almost 30 million people in the Nordic market. And I've been testing together with clever circular economists how can we use system approach, and very thrilled seeing the Global Circularity Gap Report presented in 2018. Really wanted to make Norway be part of the pilot country to test, can we break down global numbers to national numbers? And it was really insightful, getting a number, and I will reveal it to you later. It was very devastating, but also see how we use measurables and key KPIs, so we can count actually our circularity, testing the pilot of circular city methodology in Kongsvinger region. And you will see here how I love to work down into value system, value chains, until finally last year, Norway received the first national strategy from our government that has been a change maker for everyone. Now we are not like paving way anymore. Now we will be supported by governmental policy changing. Also, I truly believe in some kind of the larger approach. So work very closely with European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform. And I also feel very connected to securing the business approach by participating in the Technical Committee of Circular Economy, which I will share with you here. It is actually how businesses along the world, across all our value chains, across continents, are now unifying in developing a circular ISO standard. And I would really encourage everyone who is like identifying countries or nations or markets to aboard this standardization. Within a year to 3, this TC 323 will be a product labeling and standardization following. You will see here is Australia, here's Africa, here's South America, here's the Asian continent. And this insight will be a denominator for a lot of businesses, either if you're on the producer side, on the processing side, or like on the demand side. More than 85 countries are participating in this collaboration of standardization. For me, not being a standard expert, I really love and learn a lot to be part of these work packages where they evolve standards, management standards that will unify us much faster when we work together. This is just an excerpt from what this standardization will be defining, but just to revelate, they clearly state that the transition is transition to an economic system that uses a systemic approach, and hence they pinpoint more variables but it is about understanding new value networks. It is about promoting long-term economic visions, and it is also a social dimension to this. So this is just like a draft in the drawing, but I love to see the holistic approach. On the European continent, we see that the European Union, they also have the European investment banks that 2 years ago promoted this 15 steps how to avoid becoming a circular city. So it is a clear incentive that the investment opportunities for cities that want to become a circular city engine is very available. And how do we see this circular economy unifies us? How to solve waste problems? How do we have a resource productivity to all our assets and space? How do we actually deal with our housing problems? And how do we see the circular economy now emerges as 45% being contributor to the larger challenges we have? Myself, I have a background from systems design and believe in systemic approach for circular economy. And there are now coming a number of open source methodologies and blueprints that we can learn and adapt and co-learn and share. And this is more about always having a holistic, neutral view. How do we understand a structure before we start saying this is the policy solution or this is the action plan? So getting the time we need to work together before we start making the actionables. This is a good way to resist resistance and produce, we are a multiple stakeholder network governance. Because what we see is coming as a really emergency now. It is red listed materials, red listed scarce resources, prime availability for primary materials. They're really hitting the price tag now. So the prices is really hitting the market, but we don't see the systems have developed in time to be able to provide secondary materials. We also see there is a paradox. We want to have renewable revolution with solar and with wind, but they tend to emerge on a linear mindset. And also we see that the electrification and renewable revolution, and you see on the right-hand side, they really demand red-listed critical minerals. So we need a material revolution very soon. So the need to look at our value chains across our globe together and also see cities as neutral systems, understanding that wherever we emerge from, circular economy is actually our heritage. It is about really caring for the materials and how do we build buildings, roads, systems that are modular and that are lasting, and that we really nurture and value the resources we actually have. Because when we look at a circular city that wants to transition, you will see the city is really split up in silos and sectors, and is not made for collaboration internally nor externally. And when we start trying to test for circular initiatives, it looks messy, it looks chaotic, and it looks who is going to store this, who is going to do that, because today's cities they tend to pretend linear systems. So how do we actually open for the collaboration between a city center and its region, and open for where are the infrastructure that is needed? So here we go, trying to at least collect the Nordic cities to try to find some understanding, common understanding, how we can use our own turfs and cities and urban regions to develop a model or methodology. And we start where we are really admiring, we really got one number that connects us all. 5 years ago, we learned that circular economy globally is only 9% circular. It means that less than 10% of materials are ever getting back into loops again, and we cannot keep on with this wasteful, waste-producing economy. When we measured the Norwegian economy, it really looks terrible because it shows what a devastating consumption-based society it is, very import-based, only 2.4% circular. But this number and this colorful picture, which is not Excel graphs or number sheets, but this from the outer left, where do any material origin from, what is important, what is domestic. But the most important I like to show you out on the right-hand side, we zoom in and we see wherever we are on Earth, in a city, if it's Nairobi or it's Narvik, very close to I am, there are common basic human needs which drives consumption and material flows. It is about sheltering and housing. How do we design for sheltering? How are our communication systems designed for circular economy? How is our mobility and transport system ready-made for that? How do we look at health services, which is a necessity in any community? Public services as communication and education, and not to forget our t-shirts, our clothing, our boats, our leisure, free time, and also knowing that food system, you will see down here on the green, is a really demanding value stream from linear, but also opportunity going circular. So here it goes. I would like to show you this model we learned from our Dutch colleagues in circular economy and circular hotspots. So we collaborate the Nordic hotspot with a Dutch hotspot and with lots of hotspots around the world. But here we see the circular city as a system where it's not only its industrial park or its wasteful park, but it's about seeing housing, mobility, food, energy, water, ports in a togetherness. And how can we design policies and make ready for that? I will not know what is the answer in Amsterdam or in Glasgow or in Singapore, but I can know what is the answer where I start digging down, looking at what is the challenge at my region or space. So how do we use data-driven strategy process? How do we see that seeing emissions and pollutions in a togetherness, but also look upstream, not only downstream on our waste mountains, but look upstream. How can we close the pipe for what we don't want to have into our city systems? Also see how to learn from each other. And this methodology that I love so much, it can be adapted and changed, but you have to understand who are the people living here. What are the key skills? What did we learn generations back in time? And what is the natural space of the and society of this place? And then we go dig down into the actual material flow analysis. And then we start what I love. Then when we know what we know, we can align making circular strategies and together make an action plan. This can solve, how does it look? Yes, this is how we actually put together the real problems of our place. What is red on our emissions, what is yellow, and where are opportunities? Also, do we look at our region? We can geotag and we can look at what kind of jobs and skills do we need in this place? Where can we provide growth and new entrepreneurship and innovation, business development, and tag it and put people together with wasteful value streams that need to be solved. And this is also very structured. When we look on the left-hand side, we can look at the material flow analysis across resources on the inbound side. What's coming into the system? Is it a shipyard? Is it a factory? Is it a food store? And also connect this with what is the waste going out on the other side. And when we know what we know, because I would say that's the biggest challenge. Most of the time we don't know what we don't know. But when we get to this point, we can make strategies. How do our place solve our wasteful problems and make untraveled or short traveled or local resources as key enabler for the transition? And then we start looking for the local business opportunity. Might we have a local food system? How can we start brewing, baking food on local brew waste? How can we actually use the local material overuse as entrepreneurship? And that's how we can start looking at policy interventions. How do we have to do anything about land regulation or spatial planning? What we see very often come in as a necessity is how do we actually demand differently, how circular procurement And do we actually have the knowledge and skills? And will we need to align with our universities to build new knowledge as we are working? And we also see the ability of network governance. And I see this unity, how we also approach seeing policy innovation and legislation is very often a barrier for going circular. And this is where we are supported by the business and financial community. Myself, I learned this very strongly several years ago when I went studying and looked at Glasgow. How did they manage their rapid and very accurate circular transition? And using and testing this methodology, I would also do this pilot in Norway, just as a learning, how could we adapt to a proven blueprint? And this is also understanding how the city is a service provider, and also understanding this role of a municipality and have the city itself as a subject, not only an object. And circular jobs are not only about who are dealing with the waste, but really revelating that we need designers, technology developers, infrastructure development. We really want to have the skills across all kinds of value chain, and see the growth in circular jobs is very often an incentive for a place or a region to invest in circular economy transition. And very short, this is where I learn, oh, we have to reuse our stuff, but we also see that a circular procurement system, where do we start? Is it on the hard part, or is it like the low start? And I don't have like one silver bullet, but seeing on the low, like a maturity level on the left-hand side, immediately start looking at products and services, how we start demanding for recycled materials that might be reused, eliminating packaging. Next level, we start really evolving for new products, new materials, and seeing how modularity and longevity is getting into our mindset. When it really starts to become difficult in circular procurement is when we're going to demand for new business models, not only buying cheapest, we're going to really invest in products that will last. And these are leasing services and products as services and sharing services, and seeing this is a benefit for both more jobs, but also long-lasting projects. And finally, when we are to develop new parts of the city or city system, really challenging our mayors and city developers to look at circular ecosystems that are totally waste-free. So in a material flow mapping, the key takeaway is that everything is measurable, and how much we can measure that makes it possible for us to reach new targets and goals. The chaotic is an opportunity to make this beautiful X-ray picture of flows in a city, and every city has its own DNA of material flows. And what we're testing in our community now is also understanding that nothing of this can be achieved until we understand that it's the social dimension. Who are the people in the city? How can we make human-centered and nature-positive city development? Understanding that we have to bring in arts, culture, and societal needs, not only material problems, and understanding, as you see, contexts. It does make a difference if you're in an Arctic or a tropical region, but still the circular city systems will be the same. So here we can evolve, trying to learn now. This is a mindset we're testing. When we see a city function, we can test it as product, as a service model. We see how do every city connect with nature and our nature origin, and that understanding both foreign materials, but also nature elements, but also the context that is making this talk that we do today interesting. What is the similarities of Nairobi or Narvik? How do we connect Cape Town to North Cape? Because place matters. Thank you. I hope this was an input to a fruitful discussion of how to evolve circular city transition policy strategies. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much, Catherine. I noted down societal needs drive circular change across sectors and value chains. And indeed, circular economy is our heritage. Thank you very much. I hope to all attendees, your knowledge has been expanded by that beautiful presentation, nice graphics. I mean, well done. So please, as a reminder that put in the chat box, you do have the opportunity to submit your questions, your text questions. Just kindly type them and put them in the chat box. after the second panelist presentation, we will then take all the questions, and of course, our panel members will do the possible best to answer all of them. So at this point in time, I would like to welcome our second panelist speaker, Venan Sondo. Venan is the lead chant Afrique. So Venan, hello, how do you do? You have the next 15 minutes to give us an overview of policy formulation, policy implementation, and how that hinders or hampers, or how it is inimical to the growth of entrepreneurs in Africa as a whole.
Okay.
Thank you.
So hi, this is Venan from Centrafrique, and I would probably frame the narrative, from the angle of, the work we do, the challenges we face, and why lack of policy is actually impeding the good work we are doing, not just here in Ghana, probably across every other part of Africa, especially. Why do we do what we do? In Centrafrique, we literally focus on enabling Africa's transition towards circular economy. Bottom line is, there is the need for a systemic shift if we really want to kind of see ourselves meeting the 2030 goals. And why? Simply because by 2050, for example, our population in Africa is probably going to be close to 2 billion people. And when you think about what we do every day, and when you look around all the proliferation of new sort of delivery systems that kind of transport single-use plastics from A to B, increasing by the numbers every day. If you look at our road networks and see the amount of time lost, just by sitting in a car, what that means to businesses, what that means to schools, what that means to service deliveries like healthcare, education, and the financial system. And then if you look at our entire food system and see the amount of losses that we actually incur from farm to fork, simply because of either inefficient transportation, inefficient storage, or just lack of the right kind of agricultural input. And when you look at all that, then you kind of think of the fact that while some parts of the world are actually maximizing opportunities from recycling their waste, in parts of Ghana, not just Ghana, Cameroon, Nigeria, poor sanitation is costing us millions of dollars every year, which is actually, it is costing the economy millions of dollars. Then that is actually an opportunity that we could have leveraged to actually accelerate our transformational economic growth. So at Centrafrique, we kind of feel like for the sustainable development goals to be achieved, for this sort of sustainable lifestyles and living to be possible, we focus on the four sort of policy approach, kind of four kind of A philosophy. Sustainable living has to be affordable, it has to be available, it has to be accessible and aspirational to everybody. But that is not the case. It is just probably available, affordable, and accessible to maybe 20% of the masses. What about the other 80%? How do you want to kind of make it possible for them to be able to have access to choices that, of course, would actually steer them towards a particular way of living, or actually have the right sort of conscious mindset in terms of approaching or choosing a particular product. And when you look at the whole sort of drive towards the framework for the circular economy, and of course, a couple of countries in Africa that have already started with action plans and roadmaps. Ghana is doing one now, Rwanda is doing one, Cote d'Ivoire is doing one, I think even Gambia is also doing one. Before long, we would probably have some sort of assessment framework to identify which one has actually worked best. We're not really there yet. We're still kind of doing that sort of problem of setting up the framework and defining what actually works for a circular economy policy in Africa. But then when you look at most of them, they totally focus on the goal 3 of Ellen MacArthur's Foundation's kind of a global policy framework, which kind of focuses on making the economics work. But then how do you make the economics to work when you don't have underlying indicators in terms of how it should work? I mean, there is totally no underlying design sort of principles ingrained within the whole economic setup. There is totally huge inefficiencies in the way to manage resources. And so how do you kind of make an extended polluter responsibility actually work when you don't really know at what price point that could really work? That actually really comes kind of makes it very apparent that there is no sort of cookie cutter solution here. Luckily, I'm part of the team that is developing the Circular Economy Action Plan for Ghana. And we're kind of looking at the fact that it's so urgent, right? You don't have the time and the luxury to actually look at everything and then kind of decide, okay, fine, this is what we do. But I think it's more important that you focus on more like a sectoral approach, which sectors actually are going to bring the right kind of rapid transformation that actually also provides a business case and actually unlocks other opportunities for any sort of circular economy strategy to proliferate. And so that is what we're doing effectively, because you can't, we've had policies for decades now which are totally existing in silos. Healthcare, education, transport, agriculture, and everything, they're totally designed to operate in silos. And when you look at the circular economy, as Katrin was saying, where you have this totally holistic approach of looking at all the human dynamics, the economic dynamics, financial and societal dynamics. I do remember when we joined one of the first sort of incubators here, when we kind of presented what we were doing, which was more like aspects of the circular economy, right? How do you kind of address the problem by tackling consumerism and production at the same time? And we're told, no, you're too broad. You need to focus on one thing, right? You know, like, okay, but then how do you focus on one thing when you can't address the other one? Because that one thing has to make the other one work. How do you address sustainable consumption if you don't address sustainable production, for example, right? And 3 years later, just talking about the solution, when we presented the same thing, we actually were given a grant to kind of test out our approach towards unlocking opportunities for sustainable choices for the coastal communities and the Lake Volta communities in Ghana. So a project called Net Cycle basically focused on, okay, fine, how can you actually unlock all sorts of resources and kind of financial mechanisms to provide access to recycling facilities in rural communities where nobody actually ever goes there for anything, because it is always said doing recycling in rural communities doesn't pay, right? So they're totally at their own mercy. But in urban cities, you have a huge number of waste service providers who actually operate within the urban communities, but not in the rural communities. So our project looks at how can you operate there, unlock access to recycled material, while actually connecting with those who need this material from other parts of the world, such that you can plow back the premiums and actually make the process work in rural communities. And that is what Net Cycle is all about. So bottom line is there is no existing underlying policy that supports what you're doing, right? It's the same thing with any entrepreneur in any part of Africa. You have most of the entrepreneurs operating within goal 1 and 2 of the kind of global policy framework set up by Ellen MacArthur. But, you know, they operate there, they need all these resources, they need policy to actually guide them, they need sort of innovation, they need local banks actually buy into it, but because there is no underlying sort of national framework in terms of policy that supports what they are doing and kind of backs any sort of investment that they could actually, attract, it is very impossible for them to actually have the right kind of traction. So while designing policy, although it is always important to focus on, everybody seems to focus on waste at the moment. Of course, it's apparent that waste is more or less the first thing that we see. It kind of jumps into our eyes. But then, as Katrin was also saying, you have the housing issues. How do you construct in a way that looks at our local material without relying on the total, network of imported material, which is, one, expensive, two, is now very, very difficult to have access to them because of the global shipping issues, and thirdly, I mean, it's totally very, very expensive. But then how do you actually look at policy that would spur some sort of sustainable construction practices, which looks at developing material locally and actually putting in place policies that would promote the use of the local materials at a price that is actually affordable to everybody. So that is more like the generic framework of looking at where do we focus on. For each country is going to be very different. Rwanda, for example, actually added water to their circular economy action plan, right? And we're still kind of looking at the action plan for Ghana to figure out which of the sectors are actually going to be most important. Of course, we can actually identify it and actually take it to the plan. And then we say, no, we prefer this one, prefer that one, right? And the bottom line is, it is always very important to make sure that you focus on those things that will bring the greatest traction. Because when you do that, you actually unlock a lot of other opportunities that not only validates the fact that it really works, but then you actually unlock a lot more opportunities that make it a more like a successful mission where people can actually buy into the traction, they can see it, they can feel it, and actually relate to it. Because a friend of mine keeps telling me, Van, and you're the first person I heard the word circular economy from. I don't really know what it meant. I never knew what it meant when you spoke to me about it. Right? A lot of people don't relate to what it actually means because they don't feel it. Although we used to practice these things long time ago, back in the days when we visit grandma in the village, those practices were actually very, very enshrined in the way we live with our environment. But of course, we kind of grew up, we moved to the cities, and then everything sort of changed. We kind of found it very cool to use single-use plastics and all that stuff. So from my experience, it's always very difficult operating without policy. But then we also have to kind of play a very, very important role, making sure that we participate in that process. So the policy development process should be very, very inclusive, participative. I mean, if you look at the stakeholder list that we have now, kind of touch on everybody, right? But if you kind of flip back about 6 years ago and look at any sort of policy that was being developed, you would see there were only some certain kind of people, right? The CSOs were totally missing. But now there's a lot of emphasis on we need to bring in the CSOs because they're actually those who do the implementation on the ground. We need to bring in the informal way speakers because they actually do the actual work. You need to bring in the finance people. You need to bring in the bankers. You need to bring in the government. So it's more like it should be a really inclusive approach, which is what I'm seeing anyway with most of the policies that you've seen around the place. And of course, focusing on what works, for each country. So for me, for us, it's more like work in progress. We're still looking at what is the right sort of policy framework that works. Of course, there's the global sort of 1 to 5 goals proposed by the Circular Economy Global Framework. But it would take a while before we actually come to identify which policy actually works. But it only works if we are inclusive in our approach and making sure that we are looking at relevant issues that affect not just the entire country, but societies. So thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Excellent, Venan. I noted here, I realized you stressed the point on sectoral and inclusive approach. And indeed, silo thinking. Why do we have this compartmentalized thinking, and behaviors that prohibit that collaboration that you need across, those sectors to address the complex problems? Thank you very much indeed. I see that questions have started being put into the chat box, but we will get to the point of question and answer session. Just before that, may I please invite Bez. Bez is an executive team member of ACN. She's going to take us through, there's a video presentation she's going to take us through. Please just sit back and watch this 2 to 3 minutes video presentation. It's a Kenyan company recycling plastics into bricks. That's the case study. Bez, please.
Yeah, Daniel, are you going to show?
Yeah, we're actually going to play the video now, and then after that, Bez can.
Let's turn trash into cash. My name is Nzambi Mate. I'm the founder of Jijenge Makers Limited, and we convert plastic waste into building products. Plastic waste is not just a Kenya problem, but it's a worldwide problem. And here in Nairobi, we generate about 500 metric tons of plastic waste every single day, and only a fraction of that is recycled. We decided, what more can we do instead of just sitting in the sidelines and complaining? Essentially, companies have to pay to dispose the waste. So we solve their problem. The waste essentially comes for free. This is the plastic waste we get from factories. With this, we mix with sand, as the plastic is like the binder. We have 3 machines. The extruder does the mixing of plastic waste with sand at very high temperatures, and then the press compresses it. Plastic is fibrous in nature, and so therefore the brick ends up having a stronger compression strength. Does that look like waste to you? It's almost half the weight, so therefore during transportation and installation it's faster in terms of cost implication. We right now have a capacity of producing 1,000 to 1,500 bricks a day. So far we have recycled 20 metric tons, and we are looking to push that value to 50 by the end of next financial year. Winning the Young Champions of the Earth award is a huge motivation booster for us as a team. It's been a long 3-year journey, and so this was like someone saying, I see what you're doing and I appreciate that. And with this platform, we're looking to see how we can get on both partners to scale this solution, not just in Kenya, but all over Africa, just to start. And in addition to that, be able to impact and motivate other people and other youths to do similar things in different places. So right now we are just making paving blocks, but we now want to make actual building blocks. As I like saying, you have to be true to your why. Why are you doing this? What is the motivation behind it? For me, I was just tired of being in the sidelines of seeing plastic. I ideally jumped in off a cliff without even a parachute. I was building it as I was falling down. But isn't that how great things are done? So act for nature.
Thank you, Daniel. That was really a motivational video clip and case study from our neighboring country, Kenya. The reason why we want this short air it here was we wanted to showcase that demotivated by policies on the ground. There's a very good chance if they're not supported by policies, they might not be aired to the community or bear fruit. So what kind of expertise or policy incentives provide alternative solutions or allow alternative solutions to be, innovative solutions to be in the country or sold in the markets of each country, so that, we would look forward for circular economy principles to address them. That was the motivation behind this clip. And a simple example is when you ban plastics totally with certain millimeter characteristics, of course, you have to provide the alternative. The policies without alternatives usually don't work, and we want to showcase a good one, but we also want the audience to reflect on their challenging experience on this one. So thank you, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Bez. I think in addition to what you just explained, all I would say is that action is more important than meditation, and exactly what Zambi Mate is doing in Kenya. Kudos to her. So now we are in the section of question and answer. I see some questions already in the chat box. So Catherine and Vernon, I think we have our first question from Joshua, and I believe that question is directed to Catherine. So Catherine, from your presentation, I realized that your entry point into the city planning tool you use is through the pillars of sustainable development, sustainability. That's the environment, economic, and societal. And Joshua says, how can we access the circular city planning tool? Does it cover African countries?
Yes, I do not know of the overall number of cities, but I know that a variety of cities, both in, I'm very sure that when I got to know this city system, it was about 20 cities, and that's like 2 years ago. And I'm very sure they are very eager to join all cities, like anything which more than 50,000 people, inhabitants. And I can for sure provide connection and contact and see if you would be interested in testing this in any city or town or region on the African continent. I would also quote the wonderful entrepreneur winner here, because testing same solution on different places, I think it's a very good idea. So if you are attracted to this approach as some kind of a planning tool, I think I'm happy to provide. It's made for global use. It's made for generic use.
Thank you, Catherine. I see that Arawa also put a question in the chat box, and it says, how can higher education institutions, research institutions, achieve sustainable, so as the SDG goals? How can they come together with the government to make good policies? That's what I see here. That's what Arawa says. How can higher institutions, come together, join forces with the government to make stronger policies? I think, Katri, you want to take that, and then I'll pass on the same question to Vernon.
Immediately on the academic side, I'm very interested to hear what Vernon is saying now. But I would say also the academic institutions, because this was a topic Vernon mentioned, it's a silo. So even the academics are very silo-based now. So we see engineering is engineering, we see economics is economics, we see social anthropology. So how do we actually also challenge or include the academic institutions to become more holistic and be able to look at both private, public, moreover on a cross-industrial framework. Building knowledge, what worries me now, we're still training linear economists and linear business, and this is really keeping me sleepless at night. So we have to emerge circular thinking in every skilled field.
Thank you, Vernon.
There are a few MBA courses now in Ghana that actually really integrate aspects of sustainability within the course. I remember being invited to speak to a couple of them. They actually seen the need to integrate these aspects in their whole curriculum. But ever so often, you realize that they're still in silos. The academia is doing their own thing, the industry is doing their own thing, and then government is doing their own thing. Key question is, how can you get these three important blocks to start actually speaking together? I mean, it's not, you can't, the industry should be willing to pay for it, right? But then on the other hand, academia should actually be looking at how can we make our research actually thematic and relevant, right? Kind of solve core business problems that is faced by the industry. And then if that is actually working, then it's actually even easier to shape policy, because when you look at it, you have the industry doing this, you have the community, and they're all working together. And then policy becomes then very easy to shape, because you know exactly what you need to actually unlock to make sure that it works perfectly. So it's really sad that we're still talking about this like 10 years on, that academia is still working in silo and governments working in silo. But there needs to be some sort of, collaboration has to be totally different now. Collaboration has to be a sort of very effective, tangible, and win-win. Because it can be, I win, you lose. How do we actually engage in tangible win-win collaborations? That is the key here in terms of getting the industry and academia to work effectively. So that's a very important point.
Yeah, well said, Benan. But before I look into the chat box, I want to ask, Nigeria is not differ from the situation which Ghana and any other African country that wants to really adopt circular economy is in. But at the point where we basically have more of incubator projects, and incubation funds and grants and whatnot. How can policy really play a role in driving, scaling up circular economy initiatives?
That's if you were looking at, let me look at some of the African countries that I know and what the situation is. You have a lot more local entrepreneurs actually championing the whole agenda. You have a lot of banks that actually want to fund, but they don't really know what exactly they need to fund, right? And then you have sort of accelerators and incubators, a lot of them that exist. They would say, CAM would kind of help you implement your plan. Yeah, but then you have a nice sort of incubation period, but then you still don't have the resources to implement. So the way I see policy playing a role here is actually looking into where can we play a part, as in not actually coming to do everything, but then looking at what can we do to unlock what is actually working at the moment. Because a lot of things are working. But the way we always do policy, we just come and say, this is what should work. Without actually looking at, okay, fine, what does actually work? What did not work? How can we make it work with policy? So because we've been so used to the whole sort of, adopting policy without actually really thinking about how, well, of course, you have other dynamics that make that happen. But until we start developing our own policy, which is aligned to what we actually need, which specifically addresses and enables what works and actually addresses what does not work. It's going to be very difficult for policy to play a very, very important role here. And our policies, especially for the circular economy, have notoriously not have a very strong monitoring and evaluation sort of focus. And for the circular economy to really work, monitoring and evaluation of indicators, how you go from A to B is very important. So until we get our policies to be a lot more holistic, right? Looking at how the various facets of the economy interact with each other, how we can align policy to make sure that we're actually addressing material flow and not necessarily inhibiting material flow, and how we can monitor and make sure that we are actually being successful in what we're doing. It is going to be very difficult for us to get policy to work effectively, especially in terms of implementing circular economy within some of our cities.
Well said, Bernard. Catherine, I would have wanted you to respond to the same question, but we are almost running behind schedule. You are very vast in the area of circular economy, and the beautiful presentation, I'm in love with those slides you shared, the models we have created and those planning tools. And so Arawa has asked here, is there a C standalone discipline in the education system? How did you get to this point, of trying to model a secular society? Is there a standalone, discipline in the education system? I think he's very much interested in that.
It's a very good question, and I believe that when about 4 years ago, I guess I maybe have the same history as Venon, being very early out and seeing it as a Tetris, very clear that the system is broken and you cannot fix a broken system from within a broken system. You have to go step a little bit outside. And it was this young girl, she was maybe 20 years, and she said, oh, I want to learn this, I want to study this, where can I go and study this? And there is still not yet like a consistent and contingent way to approach circular economy. And that's like the wonderful chaotic times, but still also understanding that why is it so important when now this ISO standardization is emerging? We don't have one silver bullet or 2 lines under the answer. But this is also why it is so beneficial for us all to work along together across continents, across industries, because we need rapid learning. What I would contribute with, and what is some kind of where I approach this very much into the economic system, because we live in an economic system which downrights value. So if I try to build on what Vernon said, what's the material? But we have a material crisis, we have a resource crisis, and the way we value wasteful materials is wrong compared to how we need to value materials that need to last. So if we have a problem with plastics or cement or with steel, we have to also fix what goes into the economic system, not only pay the price of what is leaking out. And this is like, I think, when we, as soon as possible, have a skill field which is really acknowledging and forgiving the old linear economy, that's fine. We have to deal with those problems, but really emerge the new skill field, which is an economy which values over time, and we can write it into our balance sheets, and we can procure it and regulate it. It is 2 different economic systems. So I wish I could say yes, but I am also happy to say we are on this journey together.
Thank you, Catherine. And it's important that you have stressed the ISO standard, the draft already available on circular economy. I think that's one route to go to help, any organization, any sector, any business, to make bespoke or domesticate, circular economy in their own region. So, well, as the facilitator now, I have the discretion to allow for 1 question. So please, if you have any question, you want to share an experience in the area of policy formulation or implementation in your business or in your country, please feel free to raise a virtual hand, and I'll call on you to speak for just 1 minute. Anybody? Okay, so I have 2 minutes to wrap up my own session and hand over back to Daniel. So I'll ask in 1 minute, Catherine, could you just, and then I'll ask Vernon as well too, what are the barriers and bottlenecks that you think are limiting Africa, in policy formulation on resource efficiency?
Can I turn it around? I think the opportunity is amazing, because the world needs radical new solutions very, very fast that work. And I don't know like the conditions, and I would love to listen, Vernon, but I know circular economy is based on local knowledge, local resource, local entrepreneurship. So I can only share that I truly believe that I feel living in a very demanding, wasteful, representing the Nordics, we are consuming more than any average in the world, and it's to be very ashamed of. So going on the opposite, how can we evolve a circular economy in a more condition which understands scarcity? Scarcity is maybe one of the key enablers for evolving circular economy. And maybe that might be an opportunity as well.
Yes, you see opportunities. I'll ask Bernard the same question. So let me focus. I'm focusing it now on the policymakers. What do you think are the barriers or bottlenecks that limit them in trying to, formulate or implement policies in terms of economic resource efficiency?
Just like the struggle with the Millennium Development Goals and the SDGs and all that, it's purely a lack of understanding of the opportunities that are inherent in a circular economy. If they can really start understanding those opportunities and really lay emphasis on how they can unlock access to these opportunities by the way they implement policy, that would actually flip the coin and actually make it a very straightforward process. And that is unfortunately always the main problem with policy across Africa, because you have a bunch of people who are really competent, but don't really relate to what is actually happening on the ground in terms of how their policies as articulated are actually effective or not. So until we address that, again, it's going to be challenging. I'm not saying it's going to be impossible. It's going to be really challenging to get them. But luckily enough, you have a lot of traction within some of the countries that I've seen. You have a lot of smart politicians actually championing the cause. And hopefully, that would actually turn the trend and make sure that this is actually successful.
Right. Well said. Well said. So for me, just for me to add my own contribution, I think where policies just exist as paper tigers, really, implementation should be prioritized, particularly in the African continent. And I understand that political considerations really have been over-prioritized. So when you speak of Africa, if you mention Africa, you're mentioning politics. And so that has made us neglect, core business investment, financing opportunities that those policies, should be tapped to, particularly in various sectors. And so with that, I would say thank you very, very much, Catherine and Vernon. I am overshooting my time facilitating. It's been nice, for us to listen to your thoughts. You have made good presentations. You've answered all the questions nicely. And so again, thank you to all the participants. It's been a pleasure facilitating this session. So I'll hand over back to Daniel to make announcements and the closing remarks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kemi. And thanks to our panelists, Catherine and Vina. It's been an interesting session. And there are a lot of takeaways here for us. And if I may highlight one, is what was mentioned, that when we talk about circular economy transition, we should not only talk about the use of materials or material use, as it were, but we need to pay attention to the heart and culture of places, and in a way, context matters. So essentially, we need to, in a way, be able to contextualize the transition and also the enablers needed. The enablers that we may need for circular economy transition in Cape Town may be different from what we need in Lagos, and we need to pay attention to that. Thank you so much. It's been an interesting session, and I want to urge us to participants today to join us for the next session, because as we've informed you, it's a series, and the next one is leveraging partnerships for circular development. How can organizations, individuals collaborate together? How can they partner together to ensure this transition? And that's what we're going to be discussing next month. So I implore us to join us for that. Also, to please help us to fill out a survey, which is basically a reflection of it's a 3-minute survey. It's not going to take more than 3 minutes. And please, the link has been shared in the chat box. And please fill out the survey, just reflect on the session, whether it has been useful and what has been useful, basically. We would love to hear the feedback, because it's going to inform the way we plan and organize our programs further. So on behalf of the planning team, on behalf of ICLE Africa, on behalf of Stellenbosch Launch Lab, on behalf of Africa's Circular Economy Network, I want to thank you very much for joining us for this session. And I would like also to thank once more our panelists, Catherine Bat and Vernon Sundu, for honoring our invitation. And we hope to catch up with you next time, this same time next month, when we organize the next session. Thank you also to our moderator, Kemi. It's been a lovely session, and thanks for honoring us with your participation. I think I would like to draw the curtain on this session, and we hope to see you next month. Thank you everyone for joining and participating. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.